At the annual barbecue, my cousin announced, "We've decided you're not worth the drama anymore. Stay away from future gatherings." Everyone nodded in agreement. I smiled politely, then quietly removed my signature from the family business loan they all relied on. 2 weeks later, the bank called them in for an emergency meeting. I, 34M, stood at the edge of my cousin's backyard, holding a beer I hadn't touched in 20 minutes. The annual family barbecue was in full swing. Music playing from somewhere, kids running around the pool, and the smell of grilled meat filling the air. I'd been coming to these things for over 3 decades, but something felt different this year. The conversations seemed to die down whenever I approached. People found reasons to walk away. My aunt suddenly needed to check on the potato salad. My uncle remembered he had to adjust the grill temperature. Then my cousin gathered everyone near the patio. He cleared his throat with that self-important tone he'd perfected over the years, the one that made him sound like he was addressing shareholders rather than family. He said we needed to talk about something important, something that had been bothering everyone for a while now. I stood there, still holding that warm beer, watching faces I'd known my entire life avoid making eye contact with me. He told me they'd all been discussing it, that they'd reached a consensus. According to him, I brought too much drama into family gatherings. I was always stirring things up, always making people uncomfortable with my opinions and my attitude. He said they decided it would be better for everyone if I just stayed away from future family events. The drama wasn't worth it anymore. I looked around the circle of relatives, aunts, uncles, cousins, even my own brother standing there with his arms crossed. They were all nodding. Some looked apologetic, but they were still nodding. My brother wouldn't even look at me. Nobody spoke up. Nobody questioned it. They just stood there in silent agreement, waiting for my reaction. I smiled. Not a fake smile, but a genuine one that seemed to confuse them. I told them I understood completely, that I respected their decision, and that I hoped they all enjoyed the rest of their evening. My cousin looked almost disappointed, like he'd expected me to argue or make a scene that would justify their decision retroactively. Instead, I set down my beer on the nearest table, grabbed my keys, and walked out through the side gate. The drive home gave me time to think. Drama. That was rich coming from them. The drama they were referring to was me pointing out uncomfortable truths, like when I'd mentioned that my uncle's business practices were borderline fraudulent, or when I'd called out my aunt for her racist comments at Thanksgiving, or when I'd refused to participate in the collective gaslighting of my younger cousin who they'd all decided was too sensitive. I'd committed the ultimate family sin. I'd refused to pretend everything was fine when it wasn't. But there was something else they'd forgotten about. Something important that I'd been carrying quietly for the past 3 years. The family business loan. My grandfather had started a small manufacturing business 40 years ago. When he passed, he'd left it to all his grandchildren collectively, but the business had been struggling. 3 years ago, the company needed a significant loan to upgrade equipment and expand operations. The bank required personal guarantees, and most of the family couldn't qualify due to their credit situations or existing debt loads. I had a solid credit score, a stable job in finance, and no major debts. I'd signed as the primary guarantor for almost $2 million. The loan had terms that heavily favored the guarantor. My lawyer had insisted on it. If I withdrew my guarantee with proper notice, the bank would require immediate restructuring, or the family would need to find replacement guarantors within 30 days. Given the family's collective financial situation, that would be nearly impossible. The business would likely have to liquidate assets or find alternative financing at much higher rates, if they could find it at all. I sat at my kitchen table that night with a glass of whiskey and my laptop. The loan documents were in my secure cloud storage, right where I'd left them. I read through every page, reviewing the withdrawal clauses and notice requirements. My lawyer had done excellent work. Everything was airtight. I could withdraw my guarantee with written notice to the bank, effective immediately, as long as the loan wasn't currently in default, which it wasn't. I drafted the letter. It was professional, courteous, and completely devastating. I stated that due to personal circumstances and reassessment of my financial obligations, I was exercising my right to withdraw as guarantor effective immediately. I cited the specific clause numbers and attached copies of the relevant sections. I sent it via certified mail and email to the bank's commercial loan department. Then I waited. The first week passed quietly. I blocked most of my family on social media and my phone, keeping only my parents' numbers active. They'd been at the barbecue too, standing silent while their niece and nephew cast me out, but they were still my parents. My mother called once, asking if I was okay, telling me that maybe I'd overreacted by leaving so abruptly. I told her I was fine and that I'd simply respected the family's wishes. She didn't push further. The second week was when things started happening. The bank received my letter, processed it, and scheduled an emergency meeting with the family business board, which consisted of my cousin who'd led the barbecue intervention, my uncle, my brother, and 2 other cousins. The bank informed them that their loan was now under-collateralized and that they needed to either find a replacement guarantor with equivalent credit strength within 15 days or begin liquidation proceedings to pay down the loan balance. My cousin called me 17 times that day. I didn't answer. He left voicemails that progressed from confused to angry to desperate. He wanted to know what I'd done, why I'd done it, whether I understood what this meant for the family business. He said I was being petty and vindictive. He said Grandpa would be ashamed of me. That last voicemail almost made me laugh. Grandpa, who taught me to never let anyone take advantage of me, who told me that family loyalty was a two-way street. Grandpa would have understood perfectly. My brother texted me. He said we needed to talk, that this was serious, that I was destroying something our grandfather built. I replied with a single message. I told them all 3 years ago that if I ever felt unappreciated or disrespected, I'd reconsider my involvement. They'd chosen to test that boundary. My uncle showed up at my apartment on day 11. I almost didn't let him in, but curiosity got the better of me. He sat on my couch looking older than I'd ever seen him, his usual bluster completely gone. He asked me what it would take to fix this. Money? An apology? A promise that I'd be welcomed back at family events? I told him it wasn't about any of those things. It was about respect. It was about them deciding collectively that I wasn't worth the drama of basic human decency, of honest conversation, of treating me like family instead of an inconvenience. He'd stood there with everyone else and nodded along. He'd agreed that I should be excluded, that I was the problem, without once considering that maybe, just maybe, I'd been pointing out real issues that needed addressing. He tried to argue that I was taking this too far, that family businesses were bigger than personal feelings. I reminded him that he'd made it personal when he'd publicly excluded me from the family. I asked him to leave. The bank's deadline came and went. None of them could qualify as replacement guarantors. My cousin tried to offer his house as collateral, but he was already leveraged to the ceiling. My uncle's credit was shot from a bankruptcy 5 years ago. My brother made decent money, but had a mountain of student loans and car payments. The other cousins were in similar situations. The only other person who might have qualified was my father, but he refused, telling me privately that he understood why I'd done what I'd done and that he wasn't going to bail them out. The bank called an emergency board meeting. They presented 3 options: find $10 million in immediate capital to pay down the loan significantly, agree to liquidate major assets within 60 days, or enter into a restructuring agreement with interest rates triple the current ones. The family business couldn't survive any of those options long-term. The equipment they'd purchased with the loan was specialized and wouldn't sell for anywhere near its purchase price. The restructured loan would eat up all their profits, and then some. My cousin organized a family meeting without telling me, though my mother kept me informed. Everyone gathered at my aunt's house, everyone except me. According to my mother, the meeting devolved into chaos. Some family members blamed my cousin for starting this whole thing with his barbecue announcement. Others blamed my uncle for not maintaining better relationships with his creditors. My brother apparently suggested they should all just apologize and beg me to reconsider, which led to a massive argument about pride and principles. My aunt, the same one who'd been quick to walk away from me at the barbecue, called me crying. She said I was tearing the family apart, that Grandpa's legacy was going to die because of my ego. I reminded her that nobody had cared about tearing me apart from the family when it suited them. I told her that legacies built on disrespect and taking people for granted didn't deserve to survive. The calls kept coming. Distant relatives I hadn't heard from in years suddenly reached out, trying to mediate, asking me to reconsider. Each conversation followed the same pattern. They'd start by trying to make me understand how serious this was, then move to emotional manipulation about family and legacy, and finally end with thinly veiled accusations that I was being cruel and vindictive. None of them seemed to grasp the irony of suddenly caring about my inclusion in the family only when they needed something from me. Week 4 brought the first real consequences. The bank initiated formal proceedings. The business had to let go 3 employees immediately to conserve cash. Orders were delayed because they couldn't afford raw materials. My cousin's wife left him. Apparently, this financial disaster was the final straw in an already troubled marriage. My uncle had a stress-related health scare that landed him in the hospital overnight. My mother called me, not to plead their case, but to ask if I was okay. She said she understood why I'd done it, even if she wished I'd found another way. She told me that the family was falling apart, but that it had been falling apart long before this. The barbecue had just been the moment when they'd made their priorities clear. I was disposable to them until the moment I became essential. Part of me felt guilty, not for withdrawing the guarantee, that was justified, but for the collateral damage. The employees who'd lost their jobs hadn't been at that barbecue. My cousin's kids didn't deserve to see their parents' marriage implode. But I also knew that none of this would have happened if they'd simply treated me with basic respect. They'd made a calculation that excluding me would cost them nothing. They'd been wrong. The business filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. They'd try to reorganize, to find new financing, to somehow salvage what they could. The bankruptcy attorney told them their chances weren't good. The industry was competitive, and word had gotten out about their financial troubles. Customers were canceling orders, worried about delivery. Suppliers were demanding payment up front. The death spiral had begun. My cousin sent me a final email. It was long, rambling, and bitter. He blamed me for everything, for the business failing, for his marriage ending, for the family being destroyed. He called me selfish, vindictive, and cruel. He said I'd won, that I'd successfully punished them all for a single moment of poor judgment. He hoped I was happy with myself. I didn't respond immediately. I sat with it for a day, thinking about everything that had happened. They still didn't get it. They still thought this was about punishment, about revenge for a single slight. They couldn't see that the barbecue had just been the culmination of years of disrespect, of being taken for granted, of being valued only for what I could provide rather than who I was. The loan guarantee had been a symbol of my place in the family. I'd put myself at enormous financial risk for them because family was supposed to mean something, and they'd shown me exactly what it meant to them. I finally sent him a short reply. I told him this wasn't about winning or punishment. This was about natural consequences. They decided I wasn't worth keeping around. I'd simply agreed with them and acted accordingly. If the thing holding their family together was my willingness to absorb disrespect while bankrolling their dreams, then maybe that family wasn't worth holding together. Months passed. The business folded completely. Assets were sold off at auction. My cousin took a job working for a competitor. My uncle retired, his health never fully recovering from the stress. My brother and I hadn't spoken in over half a year. Extended family gatherings ceased to exist, not because I'd been excluded, but because the glue holding everyone together had dissolved entirely. I thought I'd feel more satisfied. I'd proven my point. I'd shown them what happens when you treat people as disposable. But mostly I just felt empty. I'd lost my family, even if they'd been the ones to push me away first. The holidays were quiet. My phone didn't ring nearly as often. I'd won the battle, but lost something I couldn't quite name. My father reached out eventually. He apologized for not speaking up at the barbecue, for letting them push me out without resistance. He said he'd been trying to keep the peace, to avoid making things worse, but that his silence had been a choice and it had been the wrong one. He asked if we could have dinner sometime, just the two of us. I agreed. We met at a quiet restaurant, and for the first time in years, we talked honestly. He told me that he was proud of what I'd done, even though it had cost me. He said that sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is walk away from people who don't value them, even when those people are family. He admitted that the family had been toxic for a long time, that they'd all gotten comfortable using each other, taking each other for granted. My removal of the loan guarantee had just exposed what was already there. I asked him if he thought I'd gone too far. He considered it for a long moment, then said that I'd gone exactly as far as I needed to. They'd made their choice, and I'd made mine. The consequences were unfortunate, but they weren't unjust. The legal aftermath took another year to fully resolve. I was cleared of any liability since I'd followed the proper procedures for withdrawing my guarantee. Several family members considered suing me, but were advised by attorneys that they had no case. I'd fulfilled my obligations and exercised my legal rights. The fact that it had caused them hardship was unfortunate, but not illegal. I rebuilt my life slowly, made new friends, focused on my career, started dating someone who didn't come with decades of complicated family history. Sometimes I drive past the old business location and see it sitting empty, a for lease sign in the window. I'd feel a pang of something, not quite regret, but a sadness for what could have been if things had been different. My mother told me that some family members had started to understand, though they'd never admit it out loud. They saw how the family had fractured along existing fault lines, how the business collapse had just been the catalyst for exposing deeper problems. Some of them reached out cautiously, testing the waters, trying to rebuild individual relationships outside the context of the larger family drama. I was selective about who I let back in. The ones who'd actively participated in my exclusion, who'd nodded along and remained silent, they stayed blocked. But a few cousins who'd been uncomfortable with the whole thing but too afraid to speak up, I gave them a chance. Relationships rebuilt on honesty rather than obligation, on mutual respect rather than forced proximity. The annual barbecue never happened again. My cousin sold his house and moved to another state. The family WhatsApp group that had once been constantly active was now silent, occasionally broken by someone sharing a recipe or a meme that nobody responded to. The family I'd grown up with, the one that had defined so much of my identity, simply no longer existed in any meaningful way. And somehow, I was okay with that. Because I'd learned something valuable. That family isn't about blood or obligation or shared history. It's about respect, support, and genuine care for each other's well-being. The moment they decided I wasn't worth the drama, they'd severed something more important than any legal guarantee. They'd shown me that their version of family was conditional, transactional, and ultimately hollow. I'd simply accepted their terms and removed myself from the transaction. Everything that came after was just the natural consequence of that decision, theirs and mine.